Have you ever wondered how thin the line is between protection and destruction? In the cold air of my husband's office, I found the answer. In my hands was the proof. Proof that the man I loved, the stepfather my daughter idolized, was a fraud. But that wasn't even the worst part. What I found in this briefcase was far more terrifying than betrayal. It was a secret that could destroy us all. To understand why I was standing here, my heart hammering against my ribs, holding the shattered future of my family in my hands, we have to go back 72 hours to when I still believed in fairy tales. 3 days ago, my home still smelled like baked apple pie and was filled with laughter. My daughter, Maya, had just gotten her early acceptance letter to college. At 18, she's my entire world. The reason I work so hard every single day after years of being a single mom. I used to think the happiness the two of us shared was enough. Then Julian came into our lives. He wasn't just a good man. He was a miracle. A successful, warm-hearted businessman who filled voids I didn't even know I had. He didn't just love me. He adored and championed Maya. He wasn't trying to replace her father. He created his own role. A mentor, a friend. The kind of stepfather any kid would dream of having. That's how perfect the picture was. Almost. There was always one thing that didn't belong in that picture. A black leather briefcase, always locked. It was like a small shadow in our sun-drenched home. At first I didn't think anything of it. It was just a work thing. But then I started to hear the late-night calls. I'd hear Julian's hushed whispers from behind his locked office door. His voice strained in a way I never heard otherwise. I could feel his tension through the thick wall, an anxious energy that was completely foreign to the cheerful man I knew. And then there was the briefcase itself. It never left his side. It sat primly beside his desk when he was home and was in his hand every time he left. And it was always locked. What would you do? Would you risk your happiness over a vague gut feeling? I chose to ignore it. I told myself I was being foolish, that I was letting some stupid paranoia ruin the best thing that had ever happened to me. I had everything I'd ever dreamed of, and I wasn't going to screw it up. A decision I would come to regret. I tried to believe his explanation when I finally joked about it one night. He'd said they were just sensitive client documents, that he was bound by confidentiality agreements. A perfect explanation. But something was wrong. And I was about to find out what. Things seemed fine. Until one small event, one tiny, insignificant lie, brought everything crashing down. Julian told me he had an all-day meeting with a Mr. Henderson, a major investor. He left early in the morning with his locked briefcase in hand, even complaining about how much of a grind it was going to be. That afternoon, while I was at the grocery store picking up stuff for dinner, I saw a familiar face. In the dim light of the parking lot, I saw Mr. Henderson and his son loading beach chairs and a cooler into their car. They weren't dressed for a high-stakes meeting. My heart skipped a beat. The air in my car suddenly felt thick and suffocating. I did something I've never done before. I followed them. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe I just wanted to prove myself wrong, to find a logical reason for it all, and I saw something I was never meant to see. Their house was dark, the lawn was overgrown and yellowed, and taped to their front door was a bright pink piece of paper, a foreclosure notice. They had lost everything. Julian's lie wasn't just a lie. It was a piece of a horrifying puzzle I didn't even know I was trying to solve. It was connected to the Hendersons. It was connected to the locked briefcase. All the disjointed pieces started snapping together into a terrifying picture. That night, as Julian slept beside me, his breathing deep and even, I quietly slipped out of bed. I stood before the locked office door. The air in the hallway felt heavy, and a chill crawled up my spine. I knew I only had one choice. The truth, no matter how brutal it was on the other side of this door. And I had to open it. The opportunity arrived 2 days later, wrapped in a lie. Julian came home from work looking stressed, announcing a last-minute 3-day business trip to Chicago. He said a major deal was about to fall through and he had to go save it in person. The way he said it, his eyes avoiding mine, a little too much detail in his story. It set off every alarm bell in my head. He packed in a hurry, kissed me goodbye, and told Maya he'd bring her back something special. But he didn't take the briefcase. He left it in his office, telling me he had all the digital files he needed. The moment the front door clicked shut, the silence in the house was deafening, and the briefcase sat in his office, a silent accusation, daring me to act. For the next 24 hours, I was at war with myself. I tried to lose myself in chores, scrubbing countertops that were already clean, rearranging books that were already organized. I put on a movie, but I couldn't tell you what it was about. My entire consciousness was consumed by the presence of that locked office door. It was like a black hole in the center of our home, pulling all light and happiness into it. My rational mind screamed at me that I was being a fool, that I was on the verge of destroying the most wonderful thing in my life, over a hunch about a man who had shown me nothing but kindness. But another voice, a deeper, quieter one, whispered that the truth was already in the house. It was waiting, and ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. That night, after Maya went to bed, I found myself standing in front of his bookshelf. I remembered a conversation we'd had months ago. I'd asked him what his greatest weakness was. He'd laughed and said, "Losing my keys." He then pulled a thick, leather-bound copy of The Great Gatsby from the shelf and showed me how the inside was hollowed out, his clever hiding spot for a spare key to his briefcase. The irony was so thick I could taste it. A man who had built a glittering life for himself was hiding a key inside a story about a man who built an empire on lies. My hands shook so badly it took me 3 tries to get the small brass key into the lock on the briefcase. I felt like a criminal in my own home. This was a violation, a complete betrayal of his trust. But the need to know was stronger than the guilt. The lock made a soft metallic click. The sound was deafening in the dead quiet of the house. I lifted the lid. There was no secret treasure, no evidence of an affair. At first glance, it was just boring. Stacks of files and 2 thick accounting ledgers. I opened the first one. It was pristine, computer printed, the official book he would show an accountant. Then I opened the second one. This one was a spiral notebook, filled with his own handwriting. A shadow ledger. Names I recognized. Our neighbors, friends, even the parents of one of Maya's friends, were listed next to columns of numbers. Next to those numbers were notes like full retirement fund or college savings. Then, arrows showed those numbers moving into other columns, under codes and company names I'd never heard of. I'm not an accountant, but I knew what I was looking at. He was taking their money and hiding it. My breath caught in my throat. Beneath the ledgers was a slim external hard drive. I plugged it into his desktop. The computer screen lit up, asking for a password. I tried his birthday. Denied. I tried our anniversary. Denied. Then, with a sinking feeling, I typed in 4 letters and 4 numbers, MAYA, followed by her birth year. Access granted. The cruelty of that password choice was a deliberate twist of the knife. He had hidden his crimes behind his love for my daughter. I clicked open the main folder. The files were organized with a terrifying sterile precision. But it was one folder that made my blood run cold. Client research. Inside, I found files on every single one of his victims. I clicked on the one for the Hendersons. It wasn't a financial document. It was a psychological profile. I read the words he wrote, his clinical assessment of 2 people who had treated him like a son. Subject weakness, highly trusting, views me as a surrogate son, emotionally vulnerable post-retirement. Subject need, a desire for a stable, worry-free income source. Approach: emphasize personal trust over complex data. Frame the investment as a way to secure their legacy for their grandchildren. Guarantee safety. Prime target for Phase 2. He wasn't just a fraud. He was a predator. He had studied them, dissected their hopes and fears, and used them as a weapon against them. Just when I thought it couldn't possibly get any worse, I saw a folder simply labeled Family. A sick, desperate hope flickered in me. Maybe there was an explanation. I clicked it open. It was Maya's future, mapped out in a series of spreadsheets. Maya, Ivy League tuition, year 1. Maya, graduation apartment fund. Maya, business startup capital. Each line item, each dream we had for her, was meticulously planned. And next to each one was a corresponding entry, linking it directly to the money he had taken from one of the other accounts. The Hendersons' home was paying for Maya's dorm room. The retirement fund of our friends was paying for her future. A guttural sound escaped my throat, and I stumbled back from the desk, my hand flying to my mouth. I barely made it to the bathroom before I was violently ill. The beautiful house that had been my sanctuary now felt like a crime scene. The clothes on my back, the food in our fridge, the very air I was breathing. It was all paid for with stolen money. It was all dirty. I spent the rest of the night on the cold tile floor of the office, the files spread out around me. The evidence. The proof. Paralyzed by a new, terrible, and impossible question. What in God's name was I supposed to do now? The 2 days I had to wait for Julian to return were the most surreal and agonizing of my life. I was a ghost in my own home. Every object felt tainted. The comfortable sofa we watched movies on, the kitchen table where we ate dinner, the bed I was supposed to share with him. They all felt like props on the set of a crime scene. I barely slept. When I did, I had nightmares filled with the faces of the Hendersons and the cold, hard numbers from Julian's shadow ledger. I spent hours sitting on the floor of the office, staring at the evidence, trying to formulate a plan. I practiced the confrontation in my head 100 times, imagining myself as a strong, righteous woman demanding justice. But every time the image of Maya's happy, trusting face would flash in my mind, and my resolve would crumble into dust. He came home on a Sunday evening, all smiles and energy, holding a souvenir sweatshirt from Chicago for Maya. Watching her run to him, her face lighting up as she hugged him, was like a physical blow. He was so good at it. The loving husband, the perfect father. The mask was flawless. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of my own making. I felt like a fraud, smiling and asking about his trip, while the evidence of his monstrous betrayal sat locked away in his office. I waited until Maya went out with her friends that night. The house fell quiet, the air thick with unspoken truths. I walked to his office, where he was catching up on emails, and simply opened the door. I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside. The briefcase was open on his desk, the handwritten ledger placed squarely in the center, the hard drive sitting next to it. He looked from my face to the desk, and for a split second, the mask fell. I saw it all, the flash of pure animal panic, the instant calculation, the dawning realization that the game was up. The color drained from his face. I braced myself for the anger, the denial, the gaslighting I knew was coming. But he didn't do any of that. He did something so much worse, so much more disarming. He slowly sank into his leather chair, put his face in his hands, and his shoulders began to shake. He started to sob. Not loud, theatrical sobs, but the quiet, broken sobs of a man utterly defeated. It threw me completely off balance. I had prepared for a monster, not a broken man. Through his tears, he began to talk. He told me a story, a perfectly crafted tragedy designed to bleed my righteous anger dry and replace it with pity. He told me about his first business, years ago, built from the ground up with his best friend from college. He described the trust, the shared dream, the years of working 18-hour days. And then the betrayal. He claimed his partner had systematically embezzled everything, cooking the books and leaving Julian to take the fall. He told me he lost it all. He described in humiliating detail sleeping in his car for 3 weeks, and the shame of not being able to afford a birthday present for his first son. He said his first wife couldn't handle the failure and had left him, taking their child with her. He painted himself as the ultimate victim, a good man destroyed by a cruel world. As I listened, a sick, tiny part of me wanted to believe him. It would be so much easier. If he was a victim too, then maybe this was all just a tragic mistake. But then the image of his own handwriting in the ledger flashed in my mind, the cold note next to the Henderson's name. Prime target for Phase 2. I held on to that thought like a lifeline against the tidal wave of his manipulation. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were red and filled with a pain that looked so achingly real. He told me that when he met me and Maya, he saw a second chance at the family he'd lost. He swore to himself that he would never, ever let us suffer the way he had. He would never let us feel the terror of losing everything. My voice was hoarse when I finally spoke. I asked him about the notes, the psychological profiles he had written. I asked him how a victim could be so cold, so calculating, as to label our friends as prime targets. His expression shifted. He looked at me, a flicker of something that wasn't sadness in his eyes. It was something harder. He told me, his voice low and intense, that I didn't understand. That to survive in a world of wolves, you had to become a wolf. He claimed he had to learn to think like the predators who destroyed him in order to beat them, in order to protect us, his family. He twisted his cruelty into a form of strength, his predation into a form of protection. He was admitting to being a monster, but trying to convince me he was our monster. He didn't deny the fraud. He owned it. But he reframed it. It wasn't an act of greed. It was an act of profound, albeit twisted, love and protection. He was doing it all for us, for Maya. The performance was masterful. He was taking the very evidence of his monstrosity and recasting it as a testament to his love for my daughter. Then came the final, devastating act. He slid from his chair and knelt on the floor in front of me. He took my hands, his tears splashing onto them. He wasn't asking for my forgiveness, he said. He knew he didn't deserve it. He was asking for my silence. He laid out the choice in stark, brutal terms. If I went to the police, his life was over. He would go to prison. But, he explained, it wouldn't just be his life. It would be Maya's, too. The college fund, our home, every asset we had would be seized as the proceeds of crime. The scandal would be public, and the shame would follow my daughter for the rest of her life. Her father's name would be a curse. But, he whispered, if I could just give him time, just a year until Maya was settled in college and the funds were secure, he swore he would unwind the entire scheme. He had a detailed plan to pay everyone back, to make it right. They could disappear, start over, and no one would ever have to know. He made it sound so reasonable, so logical. A temporary evil for a permanent good. He placed the entire weight of Maya's future, the security of her dreams, and the fate of his victims directly onto my shoulders. He hadn't asked for my forgiveness. He had demanded my complicity. And he had used the one thing in the world he knew I would never sacrifice, my daughter, as the bars of my cage. I was no longer just the wife of a criminal. He had made me his accomplice. I chose silence. I chose my daughter. And in doing so, I stepped into the cage Julian had built for me and locked the door behind me. The 2 months that followed were a special kind of hell. A quiet, suffocating purgatory of my own making. On the surface, our life continued its perfect trajectory. But the secret was a poison. I couldn't sleep, I barely ate, and a constant low-grade anxiety became my new normal. Every time the doorbell rang, my heart leaped into my throat. The lie was a living thing in our house, a fourth family member whose presence was felt in every silent dinner and every forced smile. I needed to know the truth. Not Julian's tear-soaked, manipulative version of it, but the real story. One sleepless night, fueled by a desperate need for solid ground in my spinning world, I started digging. I searched for the name of his old company online. It took hours, but I eventually found a few local news articles from about 10 years ago about its bankruptcy. The articles were vague, but they listed the name of his former business partner. From there, I found his ex-wife's social media profile. Her name was Catherine. Her profile was private, but her picture showed a woman with a kind, tired smile. For 3 days I stared at her name, my finger hovering over the message button. What could I possibly say? Finally, I sent a short, cryptic message, telling her who I was and that I desperately needed to understand what had really happened. While I waited, my life at home was falling apart. The rift between me and Maya was growing into a chasm. It came to a head on the way back from a college tour. Maya was buzzing, talking a mile a minute about dorm life. She turned to me, her eyes shining. I still can't believe it. None of this would be possible without Julian. He's the best, isn't he? I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. My silence was a vacuum, and her joy withered in it. "Mom, what is your problem?" she finally snapped. "You haven't said a word. Can't you just be happy for me?" I told her I was happy, just tired. She didn't buy it. "No, it's not that," she said, her voice rising. "It's been like this for weeks. Every time Julian does something nice, you get this look on your face. Is this because of Dad? Is it that you just can't stand to be happy?" The accusation was a knife to the heart. I almost told her right then and there, but the words wouldn't come out. How could I destroy her joy in that moment? So I just stayed silent, which, in her eyes, was the same as pleading guilty. A few days later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. It was Catherine, Julian's ex-wife. Her voice was cautious, wary, but she agreed to talk. The story she told me dismantled Julian's narrative, brick by brick. There was a betrayal, yes, but Julian wasn't the victim. He was the perpetrator. He had been the one making risky, fraudulent deals behind his partner's back. He drove the company into the ground, drained its assets, and then framed his partner before declaring bankruptcy. She had left him, she said, because she couldn't live with the lies, because he was a man with no moral compass. He had a soul that was hollow. I hung up the phone, the truth a block of ice in my stomach. Julian wasn't a fallen man trying to rebuild. He was a predator who had just perfected his methods. That very night, I overheard the true masterstroke of his manipulation. I was walking past Maya's room and heard his soft voice inside. I stopped. He was comforting her after our argument. "Don't be hard on your mom, sweetie," he said, his voice dripping with false compassion. "She's been through so much. After everything that happened with your biological dad, it's probably hard for her to trust that good things can last. We just have to be patient with her." He was using my past pain as a tool to explain my present behavior. He was framing my revulsion toward him as a psychological flaw. I stood there, hidden in the shadows of the hallway, feeling utterly powerless as he systematically turned my own daughter against me, all while knowing the complete monstrous truth. The breaking point came on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I was at a cafe when I saw Mrs. Gable. She was on the phone, her voice cracking as she explained to her son that their investment with that nice Mr. Miller was gone, and that they were going to have to sell her mother's jewelry to afford a deposit on a new apartment. I sat there, frozen, listening to the direct human cost of my silence. This wasn't an abstract crime anymore. This was Mrs. Gable's wedding ring. This was the Hendersons' home. This was a trail of wreckage I was now complicit in. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The moral calculation I had made crumbled into dust. Protecting my daughter could not come at the cost of my soul. I left the cafe, my mind finally, terribly clear. The debate was over. The lie had to end. Tonight. That night, I made a special dinner. I chose Maya's favorite, roasted chicken with rosemary potatoes. I even opened one of the expensive bottles of wine Julian had been saving. It was supposed to be a celebration for Maya's early acceptance into her dream school, a toast to the bright future we had all built together. The irony was so thick I felt like I could choke on it. I sat at the table, watching the two people I loved most in the world, and felt like a ghost at my own feast. The conversation was light, cheerful. Maya was buzzing, talking a mile a minute about dorm life and the classes she wanted to take. She was mapping out her entire life, a life built on a foundation of lies I was about to shatter. Julian was in his element, playing the proud, supportive father. He laughed, offered advice, and at one point, he raised his glass. He proposed a toast, his eyes meeting mine over the rim of his glass. He toasted to family, to honesty, and to the bright future ahead. I raised my glass, the crystal cool against my trembling fingers, and drank to a lie. In that moment, looking at him, so confident and so completely fraudulent, my last shred of doubt vanished. He felt no remorse. He felt no fear. He believed he was untouchable. I watched him as he listened to Maya, his expression one of perfect adoration. But I wasn't seeing a loving father anymore. I was seeing the man from Catherine's story, the man who could charm and disarm while simultaneously planning your destruction. I saw the predator who had profiled the Hendersons, assessing their weaknesses before moving in for the kill. I saw the monster, and he was sitting at my dinner table, cutting a piece of chicken for my daughter. The weight of it all, the shared meal, the stolen money, the impending doom, settled in my chest. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. After dinner, as Maya was clearing the plates, I took a deep breath. My voice, when it came out, was calmer than I thought possible. I asked them both to please join me in the living room, that I had something important to say. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate. The laughter died. Julian's face became wary, guarded. He knew. On some level, he knew the performance was over. Maya just looked confused, her brow furrowed as she followed us from the dining room. They sat together on the sofa, a united front, and I stood before them, feeling like a prosecutor about to deliver a verdict. I didn't sit down. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest, but my mind was perfectly clear. I didn't start with the anger. I started with the grief. I looked at Maya, and I told her that for the last few months I had been carrying a secret that had made me distant and cold, and that I was sorry for the pain my silence had caused her. Then, I told them the truth. I started with the lie about Mr. Henderson. I told them about following him, about the foreclosure notice on the door. Then I told them about the key, the briefcase, and the 2 sets of ledgers I found inside. I described the shadow ledger, the names of our friends, the notes about their life savings. I laid out the facts, one after another, like bricks in a wall, until the truth was standing there between us, undeniable and monstrous. Julian didn't move. He just stared at me, his face pale. Maya looked at him, her expression a whirlwind of confusion. I could see her mind refusing to accept it, searching for an alternative explanation. And then, just as I knew he would, Julian began his final performance. His face crumpled. He put his head in his hands and his shoulders began to shake. He started to tell Maya the story, the same one he told me. The story of his first betrayal, of losing everything, of being a victim. He was trying to cast the same spell on her. But this time, I was the one who broke it. "Stop," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his manufactured sobs like a shard of glass. He looked up, shocked. "Stop lying, Julian." Then I looked at Maya. I didn't want to believe it either, sweetheart. I thought maybe he was just a broken man who had made a terrible mistake. I took another breath. So I found his ex-wife. Her name is Catherine, and I spoke to her. The name, Catherine, was the one weapon he wasn't prepared for. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. The look of broken sadness vanished, instantly replaced by a flash of pure, venomous rage. It was the first truly honest expression I had seen from him. "You did what?" he hissed, his voice a low growl I'd never heard before. "She told me everything, Julian," I continued, my eyes still locked on Maya. "She told me there was a betrayal, but you weren't the victim. You were the one who betrayed your partner. You were the one who ran the company into the ground with fraudulent deals. She left you because you were a liar and a monster then, and you are a liar and a monster now." "She's a vindictive bitch," Julian spat, standing up. "She's trying to ruin my life, and now you're helping her ruin ours." He was unraveling, the real him finally spilling out. And then I delivered the final, most painful blow. I knelt in front of my daughter, forcing her to look at me, to see the truth in my eyes. "Honey, the reason I'm telling you this is because of your college fund. Your dream school." My voice finally broke, a wave of grief for her washing over me. "That money, it isn't ours. It's the Hendersons' retirement. It's Mrs. Gable's life savings. It's the money from all those people in that book who trusted him." That was it. That was the sentence that broke through. I saw the final wall of her denial crumble. Julian was still talking, pleading now, his voice a desperate whine. He reached for her, telling her I was lying, that I was crazy, that I was trying to poison her against him. But Maya didn't seem to hear him anymore. She just stared into the middle distance, her face completely ashen. She looked at Julian, the man who had been her rock, her mentor, her father, now exposed as a villain from a cheap horror movie. Then she looked at me, her mother, my face a mask of cold, hard resolve, the one who had just destroyed her world to save it. Her past and her future had been rewritten in the span of 5 minutes. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide with a horrifying, silent understanding. I could see the war raging inside her, the love, the loyalty, the confusion, the sickening, gut-wrenching truth. I had told the truth. But as I looked at my daughter's shattered face, I didn't know if I had just set her free, or if I had handed her a sentence far worse than any lie. The choice was no longer mine to make. It was hers.